All right, well, good afternoon, good morning, or good evening, depending upon where you are in the world, and welcome to today's DevOps.com webinar. I'm Charlene O'Hanlon, moderator for today's event, and I welcome you. As always, we have a great event on tap. I'm especially excited about this one because we have demos. But before we get started, we do have a few housekeeping items we need to go over. First of all, today's event is being recorded, so if you miss any or all of the event, you will have the opportunity to access it later on. Following today's webinar, we will be sending out an email that contains a link to access the webinar on demand. And we are taking questions from the audience, so if at any time during today's presentation you have a question for our speaker, please don't wait, don't hesitate, just use the question and answer tab right there on your interface, and we will try to get to as many questions as we can near the end of today's webinar. We also have a very interactive chat feature, so I do invite everyone to please chat us up with your suggestions, questions, comments, whatever. We will keep an eye on that chat, and hopefully we'll get any questions that you have answered or any comment that you have answered. And finally, at the end of today's webinar, we are doing a drawing for 4 $25 Amazon gift cards, so please stick around. Hopefully you'll be one of our 4 lucky winners. All right, with that, let's go ahead and kick off today's webinar, which is Managing Cloud Native Environments with Mirantis Container Cloud. Our speaker today is Naveen Podar, who is the Solutions Architect Cloud Infrastructure over at Mirantis. Naveen, thank you so much for joining me today. Glad to have you.
Well, thank you, and glad to be here to speak on this topic, and I'm glad to be with this audience, lovely audience. Thank you so much.
All right, well, I'm going to put myself on mute, take myself off camera, and I will see you when we get to the question and answer period.
Well, thank you so much. All right, so before I begin, I want to make sure everybody can hear me. Everybody can see my screen. If there's any issue, please feel free to put it on the chat so that we can resolve those issues. Today, welcome to this session. And today what we're going to be doing is we're going to be talking about managing cloud native environments with Mirantis Container Cloud. And I will go through a little bit of agenda items. So in this particular discussion, we will talk briefly about Mirantis and Docker container history, how the two teams collaborate together. We will then talk a little bit about Mirantis Container Cloud that helps in creating and managing multiple Kubernetes enterprise-grade Kubernetes clusters across any infrastructure of your choice. We will also talk about some of the key differentiators that the Container Cloud provides in the marketplace. And then we will go into a demo session where I will be able to show you how easy it is for us to go and create this enterprise-grade Kubernetes cluster at scale with few clicks on any infrastructure of your choice. And then finally, we will talk about how you can get your own hands dirty by trying Container Cloud for free in our trial environment. All you need to do is sign up and play on the environment. And also, you can download the trial license and get it installed in your own infrastructure or in your own workplace. And finally, after that, we will open up for a Q&A session. Definitely, when you have any Q&A, any questions, feel free to post it online, and we will get to it during our Q&A session. All right. So with that, what we will do is let's talk a little bit about Mirantis and Docker, right? So before I start talking about managing cloud native environments with Mirantis Container Cloud, a little bit of historical background is Mirantis acquired a Docker enterprise business back in 2019. And after that acquisition, what we did is we developed this new platform that integrates the best of Mirantis cloud expertise along with the Docker container expertise. And this is all based on open source and open standards. So with that, what we were able to do is we were able to bring the Docker enterprise components, Mirantis cloud native expertise, and deliver this product called Mirantis Container Cloud, which then essentially allows you to spin off and create an enterprise-grade Kubernetes cluster at scale across any infrastructure of your choice. Also, if you note on this slide, what I want to highlight is Mirantis Container Cloud products are basically built upon 3 basic foundations of choice, simplicity, and security. all of the product. Before I talk about the choice, simplicity, and security, I also want to give you a little bit of historical background about some of the core products itself. So as part of our acquisition from Docker Enterprise, there were certain products that we acquired and we renamed them. Just to reference that, if you look at Mirantis Secure Registry, prior to 2019, Mirantis Secure Registry was Docker Trusted Registry, and now it's called Mirantis Secure Registry. Mirantis Kubernetes Engine, which is now in prior to 2019, was Docker Enterprise, the UCP, and Mirantis Container Runtime is basically Docker Enterprise Engine. And on top of it sits Mirantis Container Cloud that allows you to create this Mirantis Kubernetes Engine, Kubernetes clusters that runs under Mirantis Container Runtime with Mirantis Secure Registry as your CI/CD tool for moving your and scanning your images from one environment to the other. All right. So let's take a little deep dive itself into, what Mirantis has to offer from its product. And let's also give you a little bit about a very high level overview as to how does Container Cloud sit in and how does it fit in everywhere, right? So if you look at this slide right now, what we are trying to show you is Mirantis Container Cloud basically sits on the middle of everything, right? With Mirantis Flow, which we recently announced, what you get is you can have your cloud native data center as a service across any infrastructure of a choice. And to do that, we have this product called Mirantis Container Cloud, which basically allows you to work on both virtualization layer as well as on the containerization layer through one single pane of glass. With Mirantis Container Cloud, you can have any choice of any infrastructure, right? That's a part of choice, right? So you can do this either on public clouds, so you can do this on-prem, on VMware, you can do this on OpenStack. You can also utilize bare metal with bare metal compute. And we also have our recent partnership with Equinix Metal, where you can actually deploy Mirantis Container Cloud for both your virtualization and containerization on top of Equinix Metal with bare metal as a service. Now, diving deeper into the slide itself, what I'm wanting to show you is, if you look at the right-hand side of this slide, Mirantis Container Cloud essentially allows you to create a containerized platform. With Mirantis Container Cloud, you can create Mirantis Kubernetes Engine cluster, Kubernetes at enterprise scale. And this Mirantis Kubernetes Engine clusters basically allows you to work with both type of orchestration, Kubernetes and Swarm. Most recently, we also have added a brand new product to our offering, which is called K0s. K0s is essentially our lightweight offering of Kubernetes, which is very well suited for 5G and edge use cases. But K0s is also designed to scale from single node to thousands of node with control plane and so on and so forth, right? On the left-hand side, what I also want to highlight is, even though that's not a topic of conversation today, but I want to get you introduced, is Mirantis Container Cloud also delivers OpenStack on a containerized platform. If you do need a virtualization layer or private cloud that you want to be able to create, Mirantis can deliver OpenStack on container platform. So what we have done as Mirantis is we've taken OpenStack and containerized every component of OpenStack. And then with Container Cloud on a Mirantis Kubernetes Engine cluster, we will deploy OpenStack components, which will then essentially give you access to standard OpenStack experience of Horizon UIs and all of the components that allows you to manage your virtualization layer. And on top of that, you can choose to create your containerization platform or containerized Kubernetes cluster as well, right? And that can be done again on any infrastructure. On the bottom left, I also want to highlight about the visualization layer that comes alongside with Mirantis Container Cloud. So not only Mirantis Container Cloud allows you to create this enterprise-grade Kubernetes clusters, but it also comes built in with logging, monitoring, and alerting tool. And all of this logging, monitoring, and alerting tool are based on open source standards. The product itself is called Stacklight. And if I were to dissect Stacklight, for logging, what we use is Elasticsearch with Kibana dashboard. For monitoring, we use Grafana dashboard with Prometheus. And then for alerting, we use Alerta and Alerta Manager. And also, if you're already using some other tools for alerting, we can definitely integrate that using webhooks if that tool supports it. Also, I want to highlight today is Lens. Lens is also a part of our visualization tool. That is a free offering from Mirantis. It is basically an IDE to your Kubernetes cluster. So Lens provides that visualization layer on top of any Kubernetes cluster of your choice. What Lens allows you to do is by simply attaching any cluster using kubeconfig file or using Container Cloud, you can attach a Kubernetes engine cluster directly into Lens. And with that, your developers will have a friction-free journey into a Kubernetes cluster. So let's say if somebody is starting brand new into Kubernetes, we do understand Kubernetes is pretty complex subject, and it can take a while for somebody to get very much expert on the subject. To help with that transition, what Lens allows you to do is work on every layer of Kubernetes through a visual IDE. So it gives you that IDE experience. And I would highly encourage you to also go and download Lens, which is an open source free tool that is provided by Mirantis that not only works with Mirantis Kubernetes engine clusters, but it works with any other CNCF certified Kubernetes cluster of your choice to provide complete visibility for both developers and operators in a single pane of glass. And then from a security standpoint, I'd like to highlight on the bottom right-hand corner, what Mirantis does from a security standpoint is, obviously for your secure supply chain for your software, we have Mirantis Secure Registry. Like I said, in the prior world, this used to be Docker Trusted Registry. Obviously, we've made a lot of enhancement to the product. Mirantis Secure Registry is the product which is FIPS 140-2 certified and validated, which makes it highly sought after in a federally regulated industry. Mirantis Container Runtime also has FIPS 140-2 validation enabled, and also has DSASTIG, which makes it one of the most secure container runtime to run your containers. And all of this is offered in one single platform with Mirantis Container Cloud. All right, so all this while I talked to you really high level about what Mirantis Container Cloud does, how it helps you with both virtualization and containerization platform. We talked about the monitoring, the logging, the alerting solution. Now let's talk a little bit more about how does Mirantis Container Cloud help personas, right? So when we talk about personas, primarily, I'm talking about developers who wants to be able to consume Kubernetes clusters. And I want to be also able to talk about operators who has to be able to provide this infrastructure, and as well as to be able to manage and monitor this infrastructure from one single pane of glass. So what Mirantis Container Cloud does is it provides you with that particular secure and consistent cloud experience on enterprise scale across any infrastructure for both developers and operators, so that they can work on this journey friction-free together, right? So the assumption is, let's assume your developers are consumers of your cloud and your operators are basically the providers of the cloud, right? As a developer, on top of Mirantis Container Cloud and Mirantis Kubernetes Engine clusters, I have self-service clusters. Once these Kubernetes Engine clusters are deployed, I can create those clusters on my own using single click with permissions provided to me by my administrators. I can work on choice of my own tooling. Any CI/CD tooling that I need to work with, I can integrate that into Container Cloud products. We are not an opinionated platform. Any tool that works with Kubernetes API will integrate with Kubernetes Engine as well as Mirantis Container Cloud. Clusters on demand, a completely developer-friendly API. So as you're working on these Kubernetes clusters could be deployed on any infrastructure of that choice, whether it's in public cloud or in private cloud or on-prem or in bare metal. As a developer, all I need to care about is learning one single API of Mirantis Container Cloud, which will then take care of underlying requests to any infrastructure. I don't necessarily have to worry about any updates because automated updates is taken care as part of the product. Security is built into every layer of Container Cloud and Mirantis Kubernetes Engine clusters. And what makes it pretty interesting for developers is every app that you create on top of this Mirantis Kubernetes Engine cluster on Container Cloud is highly portable, because you're running this Kubernetes engine cluster, that is going to be a similar experience, similar source across any infrastructure of your choice. Now, from an operator's standpoint, what they get to do is they get to provide a multi-cloud environment so that the application run on an infrastructure that is best suited for a particular use case for the full automation and full support of the open entire stack, right? It is not just about Kubernetes, it is also about underlying infrastructure. So how this is all done is all this is done through the secure supply chain, right? And additionally, what we do is we give the single pane of the glass experience for unified cluster operations, which takes care of multi-cloud environment, which takes care of automated full lifecycle management, and not only from creation, but also from upgrades and operations perspective. Allows you to do your user management, your persistent storage, bare metal as a service, and also provides centralized insights of every cluster that is created using Container Cloud, which comes with the stack light for logging, monitoring, and alerting, which can then be basically what you can do is you can have an aggregated data of all the clusters at a management level, so the unified cluster operations can be managed from one single pane of glass, thereby easing the life of operators as well. Now, when I did talk about the three foundation choice, I talked about choice, simplicity, and security, right? Choice because developers can make choice of any tooling. Simplicity because it provides you with a simple single pane of glass experience, not only for developers but also for operators. And security because security is available at every stack of the product, whether it's role-based access control, whether it's FIPS-enabled secure runtime, whether it's Calico for networking, it's all built into the product. From a choice also, you can do a choice of your infrastructure, like public cloud or private cloud. You can do a choice of your operating system. You can do choice of your tooling. That gives you a total flexibility where you have zero vendor lock-in and you get to do what you need to do in any environment with your Kubernetes cluster. Diving a little deeper about Container Clouds, how it makes it very fast, most easy, and most complete is Container Cloud provides you with a cloud everywhere, right? So you can deploy either Kubernetes or Swarm clusters from any infrastructure with one single set of APIs and tools, manage and deploy and observe from that single pane of glass with one consistent experience, right? So we simplify your containers from onboarding to operations, because what it allows you to do is it gives you that one consistent experience, whether you're doing this on data center to the edge, it's delivered as a service and with the guaranteed outcomes. And what this platform basically allows you to do is it allows you to focus on your own apps, on your own business outcomes, and not the infrastructure. We take care of your infrastructure details from deployment to management to operations, right? If there is a need where you need to have a fully managed Kubernetes infrastructure environment, Mirantis does provide you with that service as well. If you're interested to talk about a fully managed environment, please reach out to Mirantis sales folks, or we can definitely have you connected with our sales team and they can walk you through that particular program as well. What also it provides that benefit is when we talk about, where you don't have to worry about the infrastructure itself, that essentially means, when you're actually upgrading your Kubernetes cluster, we provide that with automated lifecycle management with zero downtime, right? So your cluster basically doesn't go through any downtime. Your workloads are basically running as your upgrades are happening. So the way that is done is because as the upgrades are happening, it does node by node. It does cordoning and draining of the node. It brings the node up to date, brings the workloads up, and then works on the next node in the series, and thereby making sure that your clusters are never down with zero downtime. I'd also like to talk a little bit now more about, as we talked in the agenda, right? How does Mirantis Container Cloud provide some key differentiators in the marketplace? Why do you want to work with Mirantis Container Cloud or Mirantis Flow as a platform, right? So if you see, Mirantis is built on the choice, simplicity, and security as a backbone, the three pillars. I'll start from the right-hand side, from the simplicity. And the first key differentiator is the single pane of glass, right? So you can manage multiple clusters running from multiple providers in single point. So you don't have to basically have multiple windows running. So you could have a cluster, MKE cluster that's running on-prem on your VMware, or maybe you're running that on Equinix Metal on bare metal, or you could be running a cluster that's on AWS or Azure. But you can manage all of that using one single pane of glass experience with Container Cloud. Integrated monitoring, very important, right? We do differentiate ourselves over here because every cluster that you create with Container Cloud comes built in with integrated monitoring. The product that I mentioned earlier, Stacklight, for logging, monitoring, and alerting, which then provides you with a fault detection and insight into your capacity ahead of time. Fault detection. So if there is anything going to go wrong with your clusters, you will get alerted and notified before something were to go wrong, thereby keeping your workloads running healthy at all times, right? Full stack lifecycle management. We not only support full stack lifecycle management on day one operations of just creating the cluster, but also from day 2 and day 3, where we have to manage and configure and operate on those clusters on a day-to-day basis. So once those clusters are created, the cluster operations for lifecycle management of upgrades, updates are managed automatically in every cluster that you create from Mirantis Container Cloud. Access control is built into Mirantis Container Cloud. We use Keycloak for our identity management. And if you are using Active Directory or any LDAP for your identity management, you can basically integrate that using Keycloak and provide role-based access control and strict access to every component of a Kubernetes cluster that is built into the product. Self-service is key. Self-service not only for developers, self-service for operators as well. From a developer standpoint, once the cluster is up, I should be able to go and create my Kubernetes cluster on the fly so that I can speed up my development. Multi-cloud, again, that's a key differentiator. We now support a true sense of multi-cloud, hybrid cloud experience, because you can create a similar experience of Kubernetes clusters across any infrastructure of the choice that is supported by our platform. And last but not the least, what makes us really truly different is our unique offering of a provider for our bare metal. So if you have Kubernetes clusters that you need to run on your bare metal nodes, we have a provider that basically works directly with your bare metal and allows you to create those bare metal clusters. And that is one of the key differentiators that Mirantis Container Cloud provides. And like I also mentioned, most recently, we've also we announced this in July of 2021. We've had a recent OEM partnership with Equinix Metal, where you can now create Container Cloud on top of Equinix Metal, where you are able to consume bare metal node out of Equinix Metal across their global metros all over the world in less than a few minutes, and you have your clusters anywhere with a bare metal compute. And that can be a public cloud alternative with cost as little as 50% or more cheaper than public cloud offering. So you should definitely check that out as well. Last but not the least, on this particular slide, what I'd like to highlight about is from a complete operational visibility and maximum uptime for logging, monitoring, and alerting, as I've already spoken before. Every cluster that you create with Container Cloud does come built in with Stacklight, which is basically a logging, monitoring, alerting solution. Like I said, for logging, Kibana with Elasticsearch, Prometheus and Grafana, Alerta, and all these tools are open source and open standard. And if there's any other tools that your organization is using that can basically interface with the Kubernetes API, that can be integrated into Container Cloud platform. Now, before I introduce you to the free trial, what I'd like to do is I'd like to take you to the product itself and show you, give you a quick demo of how easy it is for us to deploy Container Cloud and then start creating those Kubernetes cluster across any infrastructure of your choice with self-service, with single pane of glass. And to do that, in my screen, what I'm showing you is my demo environment where my Container Cloud has been deployed. And as I mentioned, we have a built-in identity management for single sign-on. We in my demo environment, this is integrated with sign-on with Google, and that's what I'm going to use today. So I'm going to sign on with Google. Hold on. Allow me a moment. And as I sign on with Google, you can see that I basically landed into my instance of Mirantis Container Cloud. So let me walk you through the navigational items and show you what exactly Container Cloud has to offer. And the first thing that I want to talk to you on the left navigation is this project space, right? As part of role-based access control, you can assign users to particular projects. These projects are basically Kubernetes namespace in the Kubernetes world. So as you can see in the screen, me as an end user, I've been assigned access to two different projects, two different namespace, pre-sales team and public workloads team. This is where I can basically work on those clusters or create those clusters. So that way I have strict access control that I get to do only what I get to do in places where I get to do, right? Next thing that I also want to talk to you about this clusters itself. When you start creating these clusters, this is where you'll be able to see all the clusters that is created across different providers, be it OpenStack, be it Equinix, be it AWS, or any other provider that is integrated in the platform. This could be clusters that you created, or this could be clusters that somebody in your team, which is part of your project, your namespace has created, and you have access to that. That is available over there. The credentials basically is the credentials that you will be provided by your operators, or sometimes you can upload it by yourself. These credentials are nothing but those API keys or your access tokens that you need to integrate to work on those providers. So let's say if I want to use Container Cloud to deploy a Kubernetes cluster on Equinix Metal, then I can basically add a new credential for Equinix where I can basically go and get the project ID from my Equinix project and my API token. And that will basically, Container Cloud will then use that project ID and API token to basically work to create that Kubernetes cluster on that particular provider. In my demo environment, you'll see that I have credentials across different providers, such as OpenStack, AWS, Equinix, VMware. And these credentials, essentially, the way I've set it up is, since we are working in a project environment that is shared between users, so I have these credentials also shared between the projects across different users, so that every user don't have to create their own credentials. Rather, you can use project level credentials as well. For deployment on VMware, we also support using RHEL licenses. RHEL licenses can be configured on Mirantis Container Cloud in two ways. One that can be done through user password registration, or you can also do the user activation key mechanism, and that is supported out of the box in the platform. Also, for the SSH keys, when you create the Kubernetes cluster and when you're deploying this either bare metal nodes or your VMs or any other EC2 instances, if you're doing that on public cloud, and if you want to add your SSH keys to those nodes so that you want to be able to access those paths to SSH after the fact, you can go ahead and add your SSH key in the Container Cloud, publicly, and then during your deployment, you can attach those keys that will be attached during provisioning to every node so that you have access to SSH on those nodes from get-go. For air-gapped sort of access and installation, Mirantis Container Cloud also provides you with a proxy setup where you can proxy into Container Cloud using proxies, and that is available through the UI also. And last but not the least, what I also want to talk to you about this is the release tab, right? So Mirantis Container Cloud has two parts to it, right? One is the management cluster, which basically has management plane. And then this cluster releases are basically the child clusters, the Kubernetes cluster that you want to create to be able to manage your workloads. So when you are creating those Kubernetes clusters, you'll be able to choose which release of Kubernetes engine you want to deploy. So right now, as part of that automated lifecycle management, anytime we release a new version of cluster release, that becomes automatically available on this release tab. And that gives you enough information about, when you click on it, what that cluster release detail has. So if I were to deploy a 7.00 version of cluster release, then in my Kubernetes cluster, I would get Kubernetes version 1.2, Containerd 1.3, and so on and so forth, right? So depending on what version you want to be able to work on or which providers that particular release is supported, you can choose that cluster release as part of your cluster deployment. And let's say if you've already deployed a cluster on 517 or 616, and a new cluster were to become available. So at that point of time, what will happen is in this particular cluster, you'll get a small up arrow, which will basically allow you to click on that button to upgrade the cluster with zero downtime, giving you a complete automation built into the product. Now, let's talk a little bit about how we actually go and create the cluster itself, right? So to create a cluster, first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go and click on this clusters tab, and then I can see create a cluster button. On top of the create cluster, there is also something called attach existing MKE clusters. Now, this is specifically important if you are an existing Mirantis customer and if you've already got Mirantis Kubernetes Engine clusters running on your environment. With Mirantis Container Cloud, you are able to attach those existing Kubernetes clusters running on MKE, attach it to a Container Cloud so that they can also be managed from Container Cloud as a single pane of glass experience, right? Today, what we will do is let's go and create a new cluster. So to create a new cluster, when I click on this create cluster button on the top right-hand corner, what it allows me to do is it first allows me to define an envelope for this cluster. It allows me to define what this cluster looks like, what it needs to have. So first thing first is I'm going to go and say webinar 001. I'm just going to give a name of a cluster. I can then choose which provider I want to deploy, right? Depending on the providers that has been enabled by my administrators, operators in the Container Cloud Management cluster, I get exposed to that. So over here, my choices on this demo environment is I can deploy this on OpenStack, I can deploy this on AWS, I can deploy this on Equinix, Azure, or vSphere. We can add other providers as well that can be made available to the end users, right? For this demo today, I'm going to choose that let's deploy this on Equinix bare metal environment, in an Equinix metal, right, environment. As soon as I select on Equinix metal, it automatically goes and selects any shared credentials that I might have within my project space. Remember earlier I showed you on the credential tab that I have a shared credential for Equinix, so I don't need to add a new credential. I can simply select the existing credentials, and then over here is where I can see which cluster release that I want to deploy. Do I want to go with the latest Kubernetes cluster release? Do I want to go with the previous version? Or do I want to go with the one that is only supported on OpenStack? I can make the choice, and then I can also go and attach my SSH keys, one or many, right? At this point in time, I'm going to say I want to be able to attach my SSH keys on this particular cluster definition so that when I add the manager nodes and worker nodes, this SSH keys will get attached to those particular nodes. On the provider tab, I can now go and then, as you've seen on public cloud, when you go to AWS and you say, I want to deploy this on US East or US West, those are regions. Similarly, on Equinix, you have this global metros and facilities where you can, these are basically those Equinix data centers where you can actually deploy your clusters across the globe, right? I could do this on Dallas, DC 13. I can do this on LA data center on LA 4. I can do this on NY 4. And all of these are being dynamically picked up because you can see that some of the data centers, if they don't have enough resources available, those are grayed out. So here I can say that I want to deploy this particular cluster today on Silicon Valley on SV15 facility, right? On the Kubernetes tab, I can go and make any changes to my CIDR pods, CIDR blocks. I'm going to leave that to default today. From a StackLight standpoint, for logging, monitoring, and alerting, by default, we will always have enable monitoring enabled. Now, if you do want logging enabled, you can simply go and click check on enable logging. And once you enable your logging, you can definitely go and modify your any out-of-the-box standards if you want to change on your retention time, persistent volume claim size, time for your Prometheus. You can all make all that changes as well. And then if you do want your StackLight components to be running on HA mode, you can do that. But if you do choose to run your StackLight components on an HA mode, then you'll want to make sure that you have 3 worker nodes attached to your Kubernetes cluster. I will leave the HA mode for now. And then on the Stacklight component, you can go and configure for different components. Like for Grafana, I want to be able to have debug level informations and so on and so forth. That can be configured. As part of alerts from the UI today, you can have these alerts come straight away into your email instead of having to go and watch your dashboards all the time. You can have alerts come to your email. You can also configure this on Slack. And to do a Slack integration, all I need is an endpoint to my Slack channel. For an example, I already have an endpoint that I have created in my Slack workspace and a channel where I will be posting these alerts so I can monitor that from my Slack. I can simply go and configure using my pound sign and the channel name and the webhook to that particular channel. And then I can enable Slack alerts, and I can also say if anything gets resolved, I also want to get an alert on send resolved. And then I can simply go and say, create this cluster, right? So when I say create this cluster, essentially it has not completely created the cluster, but what it has done is it's defined that envelope of the cluster, what the cluster should look like. Where is this cluster going to be? How is that cluster going to be? And all that stuff, right? Now I can click on that cluster and then add the machines, the worker nodes, and the managers. To highlight here, the minimum requirements for cluster deployments with Mirantis Container Cloud is 3 manager nodes to manage the HA for the quorum, and then minimum 2 worker nodes, right? At this point, all I have to do is simple click of create machine. This is where I can say I want to be able to deploy 3 manager nodes, and this is where you'll be able to make a choice of those images, OS images. Anything that is made available to you by admin will become visible on this dropdown. I have a choice of Ubuntu 18.04. And then for the machine type, you can choose on the machine type. For a standard deployment, C3 small x86 works pretty well on Equinix Metal. And also, if you are an existing customer with Equinix, and if you've already got hardware reserved in their space, you can use their hardware reservation ID so that it makes sure that it'll use those hardware that has been reserved for your enterprise. And it'll make sure that your clusters are brought up immediately without having to wait for those resources that is made available to you. At this point, I can simply go and click create. And now what it is doing essentially is, at this time, Mirantis is now going out to Equinix Metal APIs. It is commissioning those nodes and it's starting up that. And when the nodes come up, then what the next thing that it'll do is it'll drop those OS images, the Ubuntu images. Once that is done, then using the Cloud Init capability, what we will do is we'll drop in our lifecycle management LCM agent. Then the LCM agent will basically go and configure your machine, your operating system, and then it'll start the deployment of the Mirantis Kubernetes engine cluster itself, the management plane and the worker nodes. And once that piece is done, then finally it'll deploy your logging, monitoring, and alerting components on top of your worker nodes, and then it'll make your cluster go green when their cluster is completely available. On this particular thing, anywhere between 10 to 15 minutes, your cluster will be fully operational and for you to start working on it, right? To make this cluster completely ready, I will also go ahead and say I want to be able to deploy at least 2 worker nodes. And then on the worker nodes, I want to make sure that I'm adding my node levels for Stacklight so that the Stacklight is enabled on those nodes. And I will simply click create. Now, at this point in time, all I'm doing is waiting for about 10 minutes for this cluster to completely get provisioned automatically in the infrastructure of my choice so that I can start deploying my workloads. Now, the few things that I want to highlight here is, as these clusters are being created, you'll be able to see that when the cluster does come up, you'll be able to download the kubeconfig file for that cluster. You'll be able to go and configure the cluster after the fact if you want to make any other changes. You'll also be able to look at the cluster info over here, which will then give you details about this cluster. You can see a lot of this logging monitoring endpoints, which will be made available to you automatically, are in pending stat because the cluster is currently being deployed. You'll get to see all other endpoints, details about your Kubernetes engine, UCP UI. If you're familiar with Mirantis Kubernetes engine, then you'll know the UCP UI. That endpoint is also made available. And that'll all become active once this is all up and running. And then you'll also be able to see any other details. Like I said, if you have to go and configure the cluster, where you need to go and make any changes, you can do that from your settings on Stacklights. emails or anything that you want to do, you'll be able to do that as well. And then finally, not to waste the time today, as this cluster is being deployed, what I've already done is I've created another cluster ahead of time on Equinix Metal, this demo 001, which I'd like to use here during our demo to show you what that cluster looks like when the deployment is completely done, right? When the cluster is completely deployed, you'll be able to see that you will get the cluster is in ready state, and you'll be able to see that all of your clusters, information. You can also go into your cluster, and at any point of time, you can look at any events that's happening on that cluster. So let's say if we were to go back into that webinar 001 as it's deploying, you can go and see what is the most recent event, right? So all of these events are basically ephemeral, right? They will start disappearing in 60 minutes after the creation. So some of these events are basically notifying you that it's waiting for certain nodes, certain information for the cluster being created. So that is a process that it goes through. So once that cluster is available, then you can see I can get access to all my manager nodes, my worker nodes. Now, the things that I want to highlight to you is from Mirantis Container Cloud, we've just created cluster, right? Now, how easily we make it for you to manage and operate on this cluster. So to do that, first thing I want to highlight is, for ease of access, Container Cloud provides direct access to your cluster UI as well as your Grafana UI for monitoring. For your other endpoints, you can definitely go into your three-dot menu on the cluster and click on this cluster info. This is where you'll see every endpoint for the Stacklight, for whether it's for Alerta Manager, Grafana, Kibana, Prometheus. As long as you enable them in your cluster, your endpoints become available automatically. All you got to do is click on that and start looking at the details, right? So now let's do is let's go and see, first of all, if I want to access my MK UI, all I need to do is click on this MK UI. And when I click on this MK UI, it allows me to do that single sign-on using Keycloak. And I can do the single sign-on using Keycloak. It asks me to upload my Kubernetes Engine license. For now, I can skip that, and I can go in. And here, you'll be able to see that this is the same UCP UI that you've been using with Mirantis Kubernetes Engine for years now. That is available directly with a single click. And this is where you'll be able to go and access and look at all your nodes, your clusters, anything that's available from the UCP standpoint. Obviously, UCP is not a topic of a conversation, but I do wanted to show you that how easy it is for you to get there from a cluster. The next thing that I also want to talk to you about is we showed you the ease of creating clusters, right? Now, I also want to show you the ease of data capabilities that is built into Mirantis cloud platform for logging, monitoring, and alerting, right? And to do that, after the cluster is created, you can go to any cluster and click on this Grafana UI. And this is where you'll be able to see your monitoring that is pulling basically all the monitoring data through Prometheus, right? The first dashboard you'll be able to see is your cluster health dashboard. Over here, you're looking at basically all the cluster health, your pod health. You'll also be able to see that I can basically go into this dashboard and be able to look at these details from a namespace perspective itself. If I do want to deep dive, we do provide with out of the box a lot of dashboard that is built in. You can definitely create your own custom dashboards as well. There are a lot of dashboards and metrics that is already pre-created so that you can get started with the Kubernetes cluster friction-free day one. Right. One of the clusters that I can dashboard that I can pull is the system level dashboard. Here you can see that I can look at the system level for all the nodes that's in my cluster, and I can then start deep diving if I want to look at maybe file system detail of a particular node. Or maybe if I want to look at how the network sockets are doing on that particular node, I'm able to look at that information out of the box, built in straight into these clusters, right? Diving deeper into the cluster itself, if I want to go and look at certain alerts that is currently happening in my cluster, I can simply go and pull up my Prometheus time series database, the UI, and this is where you'll see that all the alerts that has been configured through Prometheus. And you'll be able to see that some of the alerts that is currently firing, and you can see some of the details. Obviously, with Prometheus, you'll not be able to look at a lot of the details of the alerts itself, what is happening, how often it's happening. So to provide a more granular details, what you can do is you can then fire in your Alerta, through Alerta, you'll be able to go and look at the same alert details, but at a more detailed level. This is where through Alerta, you'll be able to get more details about the alert. You'll also get more history about the alert, how often it's been happening, when it hasn't been happening. And all of this information will also get fired into your Slack channel. So we do understand that, you don't want to be watching and looking at dashboards all day long. So by providing you with the right alerting tool at the right platform, you will get alerted for any issues that's happening on the clusters, and providing you with a complete operational visibility for logging, monitoring, and alerting using this tools that's available on Container Cloud platform. Right. The last thing that I also want to show you in the Kubernetes Engine cluster is now we talked about the data capabilities, for upgrades. We talked about logging, monitoring, and alerting. And now, as a developer, if I want to be able to deploy a workload on this cluster, how easy I can do that using Lens, right? I talked about the TEL. So any cluster that you created on Mirantis Container Cloud, what you can do is you can install this product that I'm showing you on the screen. It's called Lens. Lens basically is our IDE to Kubernetes cluster. Works really well with Mirantis Container Cloud. To work with Mirantis Container Cloud, you'll have to install Lens. And once you've installed Lens, it's available for desktop, it's available for MacBook and any other operating systems as well. Once you've installed Lens in your workplace, then you can download and install a Lens extension for Mirantis Container Cloud. So once you install Lens extension for Mirantis Container Cloud, then what you can then do is you can go into Container Cloud, and on any cluster that you just created, you can simply go on the cluster screen and click on this menu item, and then you can say, I want to be able to add this cluster to Lens. So there's two ways to do that. I can download this kubeconfig file and take the kubeconfig file and attach that cluster to Lens manually. I can take this kubeconfig file and go to my terminal and access this cluster using kubectl and kube APIs. Or I can also take and say, add this cluster to Lens. When I click on this button, it'll say, do you really want to add this cluster to the Lens for this particular demo 001? And it's also asking, do you want an offline token so that your token doesn't expire? I don't want to do that, so that I don't want token expiring in my Lens. Then I can simply click on add. And here, when I click on this add button, you'll see that momentarily that this cluster will be made available, is added directly right here into Lens. And I now have visibility into that cluster directly from Lens, right? So now I can then, same cluster that I created in Cluster Container Cloud, I can now start looking at from Lens from an IDE. Now I can start looking at the details of the nodes from UI. Like I explained, I can look at the CPU memory. I can go into the pods that are running in different namespaces. I can do all namespaces, and I can go into the different pods that's running. I can shell into the pods. I can look at the logs of the pods. I can scale the pods. But most importantly, if you're an expert user and you do miss using your command line, your CLI, Lens also has built-in integration of context-aware terminal. So if I'm on this particular cluster, and if I don't like using the UI, and if I still want to be able to use my kubectl command, all I do, on the terminal window here, I can still use my kubectl command, kubectl get nodes, and you'll be able to see that the same information that I was able to get using my UI right here on the cluster, I'm also able to do that on Lens using the CLI as well, which then makes it very easy for both the operators as well as for the developers to not only create and manage this cluster, but also to be able to operate. And also, if you notice, if you play further with Lens, you'll be able to see that Lens does come supporting with Helm and Helm charts, and you can use Helm charts to deploy workloads out of the box into your clusters. All of the permission that you get in Lens for your cluster is the same permission that you've granted through role-based access control that will flow through in Lens using your kubectl APIs. So you will only get to do what you can do on a Kubernetes cluster, even with Lens. That security aspect is also taken care of. So with that, what I'd like to do is I'd like to take you to the screen where, after this demo, if you do or want to try, which I definitely would like to encourage you to go and try, get a free trial of Container Cloud that is available today on Mirantis.com/trial. All you need to do is Mirantis.com/trial, and you can get started with Mirantis Container Cloud and be able to deploy a Kubernetes cluster. Today, our trial environment is available free of cost, and you'll be able to deploy a real Kubernetes cluster on an Equinix platform, and it'll give you all the offerings over there. You can also download Lens for free from Mirantis.com/software download, and you can take Lens and you can attach those cluster like I showed you here in the demo, and start playing with the clusters and your workloads, and let us know how you feel and give us your feedback. And we look forward to partnering with you in your cloud native journey with our Mirantis Flow and Mirantis Container Cloud. With that, I'd like to thank you for taking your time today to listen to this webinar. And now what we will do is we'll open up to some Q&A session.
Yeah, so we have, I would say, about 5 minutes or so for questions, so we might be able to get to 1 or 2 or 3 of them. Here's a good question for you. Which CI/CD tools should we use with the Mirantis Container Cloud platform?
So that's a great question, right? So as from the very beginning, I've been talking about Mirantis Container Cloud being built on 3 different foundation: choice, simplicity, and security, right? And this question falls into the choice bracket because Mirantis Container Platform, Mirantis Flow, Mirantis Cloud Native Platform is not an opinionated platform. We are not an opinionated platform. So whatever CI/CD tool that you have that can interface with Kubernetes will work with Kubernetes, Mirantis Kubernetes platform. Hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah. All right. Great. So many great questions here. Here's another good one. When will Mirantis Container Cloud support creation of Chaos-based child clusters?
So that's another great question, right? So Mirantis offered Kubernetes cluster on K0s, which is a lightweight Kubernetes cluster for edge and 5G use cases. And that's already available right now, GA, for you to download on our K0's website, which you can find the link through Mirantis main website also. But to be able to create the child-based clusters on K0s from Mirantis Container Cloud, the technical preview will be made available on Q4 of 2021.
All right. Okay, great. Let's see. Here's another great question for you too. Does Mirantis Container Cloud support editing stack light alerts via user interface UI?
Does Mirantis Container Cloud support creating stack light alerts?
Editing stack light alerts via UI.
So Stacklight Editor for UI basically is being considered right now, and it's already in project development phase, and that is going to be basically getting delivered in the product in, I believe, Q1 of 2022.
Okay, great. Okay, time check. It's about 7 minutes to the top of the hour, so let's go ahead and do maybe 1 or 2, and then we'll close it out. Is Mirantis Secure Registry included in the child clusters deployment?
Mirantis Secure Registry for your secure supply chain. That's a good question. So today, when you create a Container Cloud, as I showed you in the demo, we do deploy your manager nodes and your worker nodes. Mirantis Secure Registry is also basically a worker replica nodes. Out of the box MSR integration with Container Cloud clusters will be made available in Q1 of 2022. But today, what you can do is you can deploy your MSR worker nodes and add it to those MKA clusters manually, just the way you normally do it. But out of the box deployment of the Secure Registry nodes will be done in Q1 of 2022.
Okay, great. Here's an interesting one. Will air-gapped deployments be supported?
I think I did talk about that in the demo, and I'm sorry if I was not very clear on that one. Yes, we do. We do support. So Container Cloud supports the air-gapped deployment through proxy configuration. If I were to, in the demo and the screen that I showed you earlier, in fact, I can share my screen one more time and show you where that information is available. Allow me a moment. So that is basically, if you see my screen right now, the air-gapped proxy setup is done through the proxy screen right here in the product. Thank you for that question.
All right, great. All right, let's see if we can get one more in here. Actually, maybe two. What components get updated as part of Mirantis Container Cloud?
That's a really, really good question. I mean, I get that very often, and we talk about not only day one operations and day two operations and fully automated lifecycle management. So as part of Mirantis Container Cloud clusters being upgraded, the components that get upgraded are basically the OS dependencies, the OS security patches, anything that has to do with container runtime, Mirantis Kubernetes Engine, Kubernetes clusters, Mirantis secure registries, and Stacklight components. All of those underlying will get updated as part of the Container Cloud upgrade component process.
All right. All right, let's do one more and then we'll close it out. Can we integrate with LDAP?
Absolutely. And that's one of the things I also pointed out during our demo and during one of our differentiators. Container Cloud is built in with Keycloak. So yes, using Keycloak, which is the default identity management, you can integrate with any LDAP, Active Directory. That can be totally done. In fact, we do that with our product with a lot of enterprise customers.
All right, great. Well, we're about 4 minutes to the top of the hour, so I'm going to close out the question and answer period at this point. Do want to thank everybody who did submit questions, and if we did not get to your question during today's webinar, please know that the folks at Mirantis are getting a copy of all the questions that came in, and I am sure that they will be more than happy to follow up with you offline to get your question answered. Another quick reminder that today's event has been recorded, so if you missed any or all of it, or if you just want to watch it again, you'll have the opportunity to do so. We are going to be sending out an email after today's webinar that contains a link to access the webinar on demand. And the webinar is also going to be living on the devops.com website, so you can always go look for it there. Just go to devops.com/webinars and look in the on-demand section. It should be right there waiting for you. All right, let's go ahead and do that drawing now for the $425 Amazon gift cards. Our first winner, our first winner today is Felix S. Congratulations, Felix.
Congratulations, Felix.
Yeah, our second winner today is Joseph C. Congratulations, Joseph.
Congratulations, Joseph.
Our third winner today is Austin O. Congratulations, Austin.
Congratulations, Austin.
And our fourth and final winner today is Keith P. Congratulations, Keith.
Well, congratulations, Keith. In fact, I think every one of you is a winner out there. You know about Mirantis Container Cloud, the free trial. Go try it.
That's true. Everybody gets to go home with something on this webinar. Free trial. No. Exactly. But I do want to just let those winners of the Amazon gift cards know that we will be following up with them by email to get their gift card over to them. So check your inbox. And if you don't see anything there, please check your spam folder. Naveen, thank you for such a great presentation. I really enjoyed it. I especially love watching those demos. So I really do appreciate that as well. As always, your expertise is always welcome.
Thank you so much. Thank you. Thank you, everybody in the audience.
Yeah, I also want to thank the audience for joining me today. This is Charlene O'Hanlon, and I'm signing off. Have a great day, everybody, and please stay safe.